In the mid-2000s, Bosch EV14 injectors changed what fuel injectors were capable of. They became more consistent, more predictable, and more reliable. This created new challenges in the market to utilize this new benefit. There was a set of companies that decided that characterization of the injectors, what they were going to focus their energy on, and making sure that the data that came from these injectors was one of the most important things that was out there. Another thing that was around that same time was fitment of these injectors, making sure that that injector could fit into my application or into my buddy's application. This is just for like everyday builds, where these other companies that were specializing in the characterization factors of the injectors, they were doing that more for tuners and for high-end builds. What we focused on was making sure that the barrier of fitment into different applications was not what people were up against. They were able to take that new EV14 injector and use it in pretty much anything. Again, if you remember the one video that we did last about the different injector components and how many of those components are actually the same no matter what injector it is that you have. And we also talked about kind of industry standards about different heights of injectors and O-ring sizes. A lot of those factors, again, fit across the entire spectrum of applications. So it's kind of easier to create different adapters that allow you to use an injector that might be a little bit shorter to become a longer application fitment, or have a different electrical connector or things of that nature. So when Bosch started offering these EV14 injectors, the flow rate might be exactly what you need, but the injector might have been shorter. It might have been a different O-ring on the top of it. Your fuel rail might have required an 11 millimeter O-ring, and these injectors came with a 14 millimeter O-ring. So those differences is where the need for these adapters came about. So we started making these and making them readily available to people along the same lines like we started doing with our components and offering those to the general public. The companies that were focusing on the characterization of the injectors also had to solve that same problem with adapters, and they were allowing people to buy an injector with the adapters already on there. But at the same time, there was no one on the market that was making the adapter, allowing someone at home for an everyday build to use that same Bosch injector. So again, that's where the need for these adapters came about and why we started designing them, so that people could use these in applications that were never meant to be fit into. It wasn't to, minimize any of the, the specialized companies' characterization of the injectors, but it was more to reduce the barrier of entry for people who wanted to do things themselves and use a Bosch off-the-shelf injector that flowed what they needed to in an application that it wasn't meant to go into. So in this video here, I wanted to go over some of the adapters that we have available and the reasons why they exist, why they look the way that they do, and kind of help you in deciding what you actually need in order to fit a Bosch injector into your application that didn't come with that, to give you an upgrade and to have something that you can do yourself and not have to go and spend the premium money that, that there's an option for. Not everybody needs to go out and buy a Bugatti, right? So let's get into it here. Let's take a look. All right, so starting off here, there are several different adapters that, that we offer here. And we're gonna try and go through these and simplify them for you and give you kind of a visual of what you're looking at and what you could use. All right, so I'm going to start off with these two here, which were some of the first adapters that were developed. All right, so in this instance here, this is a Bosch injector out of a Mustang. This is one of the most common upgrades when this all started here. So this injector was a 48 millimeter when the standard injector was a 60 millimeter O-ring to O-ring height. This is an old Bosch 160 pound injector that most people used in performance upgrades. They were not the best for trying to get an engine to idle down low, and would do a lot of weird things when you were trying to tune them. So to make this injector here the same height as a Bosch injector, you needed to extend the top of it. So we would make these adapters here, add a filter in the top, because these here don't come with a filter. And that goes on top of the injector there and changes the height. So that makes it the same height. but it uses a 14 millimeter O-ring. So now say you had an application like, I don't know, just say a Mitsubishi of some sort, you would need a 11 millimeter. So this adapter here was to take and convert that to an 11 millimeter by just simply putting that cap on there. So this injector that was being used to modify to make an 1000cc injector, they would take and decap those things. This isn't an endorsement of any practices, just kind of showing you what the adapters are for, but just trying to explain that. So, wait, why did I put that away? So after the 1000cc injector was out, Bosch had these 2200cc injectors that were a compressed natural gas injector. That's what the old Bosch 160 pound used to be, was a compressed natural gas injector. But in order to make this 2000cc injector the same height as the original height, we'd have a different cap. And this cap here would go on, and we use a clip that retains it on there because it does, there's a little wobbly if you don't have something actually retaining it onto that injector. But for the sense of this video, I'm going to not install those clips. But so now this takes and converts that short injector to again seal in the same manifold and same O-ring. And we also had another adapter that used an 11 millimeter. So you had two different options for two different heights. One was an 11 millimeter O-ring, and one was for a 14 millimeter O-ring. So now that injector can be used in this application. But what happens if your vehicle came with this injector here and you wanted a higher flowing injector like the 2000s? Well, there's a different cap that we use that's a shorter one that makes this injector here the same height as this injector. So we would use this cap here that turns it into be the 48 millimeter. And just like we had a 14 millimeter, there is an 11 millimeter adapter. And each of these adapter colors indicate what it is for. So this is a 14 millimeter that takes the NGI2, the short injectors, and makes them a 60 millimeter. The green is for the 11 millimeter. And then in order to take this injector here to a 48 millimeter size, the colors were either gold for the 14 millimeter or silver for the 11 millimeter. To take and convert the 48 millimeter into the height of these, it was red here for the 14 millimeter O-ring and blue for the 11 millimeter. All right, so that's a quick overview of the tops of these injectors here. Now, in this case here, this all assumes that the bottom part is sealed with an O-ring. That is not always the case in all of these applications here. So some applications, they actually seal not with an O-ring, but with a lower grommet. So in those cases there, you can modify the bottom of your injector and remove the little retainer that is on the bottom of that injector. If you were to break that off, I guess let me go get one and break it off. All right, so if we're going to remove that, remove the lower O-ring, and now we're going to break this off of here because we don't need to seal with an O-ring. We need to seal with a lower grommet. And in this case here, where the O-ring went, we're just replacing with a grommet. And now this injector here will seal into the manifold with a grommet. So then Bosch came out with these longer nozzle injectors, which there was a particular injector that was used in many different applications that were higher flowing than the 1000cc injectors, but less than the 2200s. That nozzle, though, doesn't actually fit every application if it's sealing at the O-ring here. If you picture this is side by side,
longer nozzle is kind of going down into the manifold on a lot of applications. So we have pants. The others were called top hats, and these were called pants that we would put on. So now it covers up that, and it's giving an O-ring bottom. So now the upper, if it's sealed on an O-ring and was the same size as this, you can use that, put the pants on the bottom, and now it's sealed on the bottom. If it needed to be taller, again, you go back to the the adapters that you need to make it to the right height that you needed, and now you have a seal on the top and the bottom. If your lower part wasn't an O-ring and it was that grommet style, you say, yeah, you can't break that off. You can't just put the lower grommet where the O-ring was on there. So we have pants that have a lower O-ring. A lower grommet where it seals on here. And again, now that gives that the height that it needs in order to fit on there. So this isn't just for like a Bosch injector. It can be, so like here's an older Toyota injector. So, you say you have the pants on here that seals with the lower grommet like that. And you have this adapter here, the 11 millimeter O-ring on the top. And now look at that. Now you have replicated this injector here. But it doesn't just go to the grommet and the lower O-ring. You have applications where it would be like, say, for a Honda, for instance, where the grommet is much bigger. So we have an adapter here that allows to use a lower seal for like a Honda, for like a D series or B series engine. This injector here comes out of a Honda. This is the grommet that came on the Honda, or there was thinner versions. So you have thinner version grommet go on, or the thicker version. And now we're making a Honda application. So there's also a big need for side feed injectors. So if a car came with a side feed injector and you want to fit a top feed injector in here, you're obviously going to need another fuel rail, but you need to be able to fit that into where this manifold sealed. A side feed injector is fed from the side versus being fed from the top. And how it's fed from the side is this injector is sitting down into a cup. And that cup is basically, aluminum that's, allows the injector to seal inside with this O-ring here and this O-ring here. But when you have that seal inside of the cup that is holding the injector, the outside of that aluminum is going to be wider. So you need to make an adapter that has a wider seal on the bottom. So this injector here can just go right inside of here. And now if you have, say, a Nissan, a Subaru, of some sort, you can take, and now that injector is sealing inside of the manifold here with an adapter. And we have two different caps for that lower seal here, but that adapter allows the user to take a side feed injector's intake manifold and put a top feed injector inside of that. And so in addition to this style of a fitment, we also have sleeves that go inside of the intake manifold to make up that difference as well. That was kind of an older style of how it was done. These here fit specifically onto the injector and down into the manifold, more of a removable option. Another very popular conversion that we have are taking these, what were an 11 millimeter injector, and converting it to be a 14 millimeter O-ring. So this injector might work for you here, but the top needs to be a larger one. Well, this sleeve goes over top of here to create a ledge for a 14 millimeter O-ring to go on. As you can see here, that can easily just roll right over that. So we have adapters here that will go over top, allow you to put the O-ring on there and create the same level of seal that any standard injector that came with that, to support that pressure of the fuel being pushed on this end here. So this is a very popular upgrade that we have for these specific injectors. For the plastic body Denso style here, there's a different cap that we have that's a little bit more graduated there. And this allows for the O-ring to go on to the plastic style, while this straight one goes on the older style Denso injectors. All right, so another option is taking on these older Type 3 Bosch injectors As you can see at the top here, this injector here has a groove in it where a clip would seal into it. And, you know, this clip would hold onto the fuel rail and keep the injector from sliding downward. This clip doesn't really do much of anything in most cases, but there are instances where that clip can't be used and there needs to be something stopping the injector from sliding down into the manifold. So in certain instances, you might find the perfect height injector, flowing injector, electrical connector injector, but your manifold was designed where this injector could fall inside of the port of the intake runner. So in order to keep up an injector like this that doesn't have any kind of way to use a retainer, we need to put on the bottom these little belts. And this little belt can kind of go over top of, on top of the you know, the O-ring here. Put the O-ring back where it belongs. And now it creates a little lip. I don't know if you can see that there, but there's a little lip that injector now can't go in any further into the manifold. That kind of replaces the need of the use of the clip, I should say, up top. So there's no way in hell that this injector can go down further in there. And you can flip it around and use it on the opposite way if need be. So right now you can see it's, you know, with the larger side on the bottom. If you flipped it up this way, now maybe the injector can slide down a little bit further. That creates the space that you needed in whatever application on whatever manifold it is that you're using. I know of a few specifics. They're in the marine world, but I know those hurdles do come up out there in the wild. So another option is these older Barbed style injectors. We do actually make an adapter that fits onto, you know, injectors for converting an O-ring injector into having a Barbed fitting. There's a little bit more to that because these injectors here were held in by a grommet going around here, so you can't necessarily use it on here, but there are different instances where this hat can be used. I'll just show one instance here, like this for a specific application. This hat could be used, and this tie down is kind of what holds the injector down again, versus on the older style injectors, when it has the rubber grommet or going around the body, that's where it was held in. So there are options to use newer injectors with this adapter hat onto different platforms. So this is a specific bracket that we make for a kit that we sell. But yeah, that's one of the least common, but it is something that is still used and available to you. So in this case here, you can see this is where this is a good use of that Barbed adapter, is on an EV1 injector that did have a 4-hole spray pattern that was an O-ring style, converted it to an application where you can use that Barbed fitting. And we do have a specific video on making this injector here work, because there is a difference in the O-ring style versus the Barbed style in the height of certain areas on this injector. So there's a specific video on our channel you can go to if you wanted to check that out. And even as the GDI market is becoming more popular, we're starting to make adapters that can fit and turn, you know, a regular Bosch injector to fit some other applications, like a GM injector, where, you know, we're replicating the top and allowing the lower seals to remain the same, giving the adapter or the injector, I should say, you know, an upper connection there. But yeah, so even in the GDI world, we're starting to make those adapters now. But thanks for tuning in, and you can see that even with a million different injectors out there, there is still a very limited number of adapters that are needed in order to kind of make anything work in whatever you're trying to fit it into. So if you have a question, just reach out to us.